Welcome, BBCers, to episode number 254 of the Broken by Concept podcast, the number one League of Legends SoloQ educational and motivational podcast. Today, we have an episode with Azzap. It's going to be the great voice comms debate in SoloQ. We're bringing on Azzap. Azzap is obviously been in the community for a long time. Streamer, Valkos extraordinaire. Welcome to the show, Azzap.
Hello, nice to be back on Broken by Concept. You really Mr. Beasted up there, Nathan, at the start.
Getting
the intro.
So sort of frame this. So it's going to be a debate, but we also would sort of explore this topic. So Curtis and I here, we've got Azzap. Charlie is in the background. He's going to be a semi-moderator, making sure the conversation is flowing, structuring. Let's say maybe it starts getting heated and we're going in circles or whatever it is. Then Charlie's going to step in and go, all right, let's move the conversation forward. We'll see how we go. Now, in terms of sort of like the whole for and against, we've been very outspoken on this podcast, Curtis and I, about our concerns, our issues. I'd say we're quite against adding voice comms to SoloQ, so that's probably going to be more the frame that we're coming from. Maybe Charlie can pop up. We've got 2 episodes we did back to back. Literally, one of our viewers brought in a video with him on SoloQ voice comms saying, hey, voice comms helps me a lot. And Curtis and I broke that down, literally saying all the fallacies potentially in that. So we have explored that topic before, but we want to get more in depth. And, a lot of people sometimes in the comments say that this podcast is just, an echo chamber of Curtis and I. So we're bringing in Azzap to sort of be a bit of a devil's advocate here. But, maybe we all just end up, maybe Azzap even makes us switches our mind, right?
But also as well, I think Azzap is someone that we respect for on this podcast for many reasons, because he's a practitioner. He plays a lot of the game, which is very important to us. He's in Challenger, but then also as well spoken and thoughtful. So again, we've listened to the comments. People want us to get other people, on this podcast, on this show, but we want to bring people on not just because they're another person, but because they're actually someone that actually thinks deeply about the game, and
we can have a very good discussion.
We can actually have a logical discussion.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think we just dive straight in.
All right, so Charlie, what sort of topics are we? How about we do a high level? What sort of topics are we going to be covering here?
So, the big question that we're trying to answer through this video, which hopefully once we get to the end, we will have an answer to this video. Should voice comms be added to SoloQ? Flat out. We're talking about ranked SoloQ here. We're going to start by exploring the difference between voice comms across different ranks. So, Master Plus compared to Gold, compared to Bronze, compared to Challenger. We're going to talk about it all. We're then going to talk about voice comms' impact on actually getting better at the game across all ranks as well. Voice comms' impact on game satisfaction and enjoyment, like any social factors that that happen with voice comms. Like, is it going to put new players off joining the game? Is it going to make games more fun, less fun? We're going to talk about how voice comms will affect game quality, which is a big topic that everyone loves talking about, is the quality of games. Are games going to be more competitive, less competitive? And then lastly, we're going to talk about Riot's point of view and what they could think about adding voice comms, whether they could be stuck into a bad decision, and kind of talk about that for a bit.
Awesome. Okay, so I think a really good place to start was what you first said there, Charles. Sort of get into perspective from us three as sort of high elo players. So what sort of, and we don't have to answer this question right now, is that does SoloQ, the voice comms of SoloQ how does that affect maybe different tiers? If you're an Iron player, Gold player, Master Tier player, Challenger player, has voice comms in SoloQ has been very sort of outspoken in Twitter, but sometimes Twitter or X or whatever can be maybe a bit, even an echo chamber of high elo players, like Challenger players are just wanting this in their games, and they're not thinking about, what is the average player Gold? Most people aren't Challenger, most people aren't Master Plus. It's a very small percentage of the community. So I want the listeners, I want us and Azzap to, if something's going crazy in this conversation, we might actually need to break it down by rank, or maybe not. Maybe voice comms flat out is perfect for every rank.
Okay, we're going to start with Azzap here as the guest. Azzap, what are your thoughts on voice comms being applied at different ranks? Do you have anywhere to start us off?
Okay, hello, awesome. Yeah, I just want to mention earlier what you said is absolutely true. We have a great exposure to people who are all disproportionately high ranks. So all the voices usually come from top down. Everyone's just looking up, and we get all of our information essentially from Master Plus players. So yeah, that's for sure true. And that's last time when we conversed about the whole never FF topic. It's in the higher eloys, the higher echelons, people kind of assume that a lot of games are easily understandable to be win conditionless and that you can just give up. Whereas that doesn't apply master and below at all. So we had this like very disproportionate idea there. Similar things could be happening with voice chat. I'm not sure. I'm not sure that's the case. We don't really have a way to do the analog to understand what voice chat could do in League of Legends. The closest thing we have is Dota and other video games, and essentially when people play on Discord together. But that's not really like it's not really good analog because those are people who voluntarily decide to go into that like voice chat covenant, and it's not exactly the same. But I would say that overall, my intuition tells me that the gameplay would improve at every level. At every level, I would imagine that the level of play would seriously improve, and maybe even be even better for lower elos in a way, because they have much more to improve upon. Whereas higher elo is more about the individual coordination, about individual plays. A lower elo, I think the trickle down sort of economy of knowledge would really help the lower players like understand the game better.
All right, so pretty contentious point, I would say, to start off with. I know Nathan and Curtis definitely have something to say about that. So I guess what we'll start with is Azzap. How would voice comms, do you think, help the lower rank players?
So you're saying Azzap, the lower rank players, you think will benefit even more potentially from voice comms than high?
Yes.
Sort of
yes.
Okay.
I think that's what my intuition tells me. Like maybe we can change my mind through this, but I'm curious what you guys have to think about this, and because I never really heard your position on this. Nathan Curtis DM me a couple of questions last night about this. I thought about it, and I do believe that it would help the lower elo players. Okay, so how would it help? How would communication SoloQ help? So I think about this in two different benefits. One would be the short term, which is usually what happens in a coordinated play. So let's say you're making a very aggressive limit testing play, and you really need to know that your teammate has a shield available, has a heal available, has something that can assist you. So that would be like a short-term idea, and that's something that will not carry any long-term benefits for you, really. It's just going to help you in that one play, because it's not like him communicating his shielder is going to help you. It's really going to make you be like, okay, so now I know that shield is now 4.5 seconds at this stage of the game with this CDR, so I'm going to do this every time in the future. It will assist you in that play, and that's fine. I think that's like the short-term gain. The long-term gain is the one that's much more beneficial for lower elo players, I would say, is the understanding of the game that comes along with communication. League of Legends, I think one of the biggest sources of toxicity in League is how people miscommunicate or not communicate at all and don't understand other roles. The biggest, I guess, difference is coming from jungler not understanding the lanes, or the lanes not understanding the jungle. I think just having a jungler say, enemy jungle pathing top, I'm pathing bot, would do like unmeasurable amount of improvement to SoloQ. Just that very statement. Yeah, and my point here is that if you have this sort of a conscious awareness of what your teammates are doing, mid lane's playing a bad matchup, like he's getting bullied by a LeBlanc into like something super weak, or he's playing Veigar or whatever, and he's like, I can't roam. I can't help you on the crab. I can't invade right now. This communication carries long-term potential into people to be more cerebral about their gameplay, to be more cautious and like consciously think about what they're doing, what is their approach to the game. I think that's the super long-term gain in here, because people become much more understanding of what they're doing and why. I think that's a big deal. I'm going to give you an example here, because we can't really do it through League of Legends, because we've been in League for 15 years without voice chat. I played Counter-Strike a little bit recently, and I'm clueless about Counter-Strike macro, like ideas, competitive. I don't know anything. I just played Counter-Strike 1.6 a while ago. So I tried out Counter-Strike 2, and I'm playing SoloQ, which has voice chat, obviously. And what happens usually in these games, like one person, one or two players are gonna have the highest knowledge in that game. So they're gonna be the most vocal usually, and they're gonna tell you about their goals, their ideas, what they want to do. So the guy says, "Can you buy a smoke? I'm going to smoke the site, and we're gonna go away in like 15 seconds delay." And it's like, okay, fine. So I go there, buy a smoke, I drop a smoke for him. He does 2 smokes in different angles. He covers both angles, like on the site. We storm in 15 seconds. Again, boom, it wins. Like we just instantly take over the site. So the if we just did that in SoloQ without voice comms, I have no idea what is he doing. As a newbie, I have no clue what the hell is he doing with those smokes. I'm just thinking he's tossing them randomly. But he has a specific spot where he stands, he tosses 2. It requires us to communicate to do both smokes. It's a very conscious effort about taking the site in the next 30 seconds or so while the smokes are operational. So I think that's a very solid analog of like conscious behavior versus unconscious just go in and shoot style. Because that's the way you perceive the game until you see a better way. And I'm guessing that this would happen in SoloQ in League of Legends, where you would have the most knowledgeable person in the team, or usually a jungler, or the most vocal, or support. They would announce their decisions in a way where you can consciously process it. And guess what? You can tell maybe they're wrong. Maybe they're not the highest knowledge person in the game. Maybe they're just the most vocal. So what happens is you have a more introverted person who's not going to speak much. And let's say this guy has an idea and he says, "We're going to do this. It's so good, guys. We're going to play aggro." And if it fails, it backfires. Now, it's very beneficial for the person who was introverted but didn't speak out, because then he understands, okay, I'm smarter than this guy. I know the play, but I didn't call it out. So the next time that person is going to call out the play. And then he's going to become the person who's more vocal and then spread the knowledge. And I think that's what I mean by the knowledge economy and the trickle down in SoloQ. You're going to have usually better players, because League of Legends is, let's be real, it's very mixed up. It's fragmented. It's not like homogeneous in terms of elo. There's a lot of smurfs. There's a lot of people playing the different roles, different accounts, a lot of banned people rejoining the game. There's a lot of baggage in terms of the MMR. People don't play many games. You play like 15, 20 games per season, so your rank is not exactly where you're supposed to be. So it's very fragmented, very mixed up. And there's a lot of like higher elo players and lower elo players in the same lobby, or like the knowledge difference tends to be high, especially because certain roles require more knowledge than the others. And it's like you can learn so much. Anyway, that's my point. I don't want to. I'm just yapping, I guess.
No, you can yap away. Oh, don't worry. If you yap too much, I will jump in. But
that's Charlie's job.
I was enjoying my yapping. I'm actually just like transfixed by what you're saying. So maybe I'll just be on your side, Azzap, and I'll just only interrupt the other 2 guys over here. Okay. So, response. Nathan, Curtis, one of you want to take it away?
You start, Curtis.
You want me to start?
Yep.
Yeah, there was a lot there to unpack. So I'm going to attempt to unpack some of those arguments, and then if I get one of your arguments wrong, just please jump in, because I don't want to misconstrue your point. So I guess number 1, I think you raised some really good points there about in specific examples where you kind of mention in bot lane there's like a Janna, and the AD carry is wondering if the Janna has shield available, and the AD carry is like, oh, do you have, could maybe communicate in a faster amount of time, do you have E? And then Janna's like, yes, and then we can go in, and then maybe the AD carry like makes that decision, maybe a Samira, whatever, decides to go in or whatever. And so I think in order to kind of dissect this particular play, we need to look at it through 2 timelines. We need to look at it through optimizing for short-term gain, and we need to look at it through optimizing for long-term learning, right? And so my contention would be that, yes, voice comms in that particular play would allow that person, that AD carry, to make a better quality decision. But my contention would be that because that they are having to rely on getting that information from someone else, they would actually learn less net and be a worse player in the long run, because they are relying on information from other people. And I feel as though the way League works, because it is a very, there's a lot in League that you need to learn. Fundamentally, it's all about completing the feedback cycle. So the way it works is that you make a decision, there's an input, and then you get some sort of an output. and then you can, this. So based off that output, you're going to get some sort of learning, and the feedback cycles in League are very quick. Can be very quick. It's like, I went in, I took this trade. Shit, this trade didn't go well. Okay, next time I can maybe not do that next time. And so there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of feedback loops going on. The problem in that case of the Jana is that person is not making that decision. Someone else is influencing that feedback loop. So you're not actually completing that feedback loop properly. You are theoretically completing it, but you're completing it in an extremely inefficient manner. So you're optimizing for the short run, for the short term, at the cost of long-term learning. And my evidence to suggest that this is the case is that there's a lot of case studies out there of people who play, for example, things like Clash, FlexQ, amateur tournaments, and they over-index in these environments, training environments, whereby they perform well on the Rift in these competitive environments, but you put them in on the Rift in SoloQ and they struggle massively. And then the argument for these players is they always say, oh, SoloQ, my teammates are holding me back, or whatever their argument is. But in reality, is that they're over-reliant on other people giving them information. And this is also why the highest ranked SoloQ players are better in competitive than the competitive players are in SoloQ. It doesn't go both ways. SoloQ players can play competitive really well, but competitive players, especially in the amateur leagues, can't play SoloQ well. And so you have this disconnect. And my contention would be that communication is actually fundamentally the biggest reason that is holding them back. So that's the first major thing. I don't want to take over the show.
I would say, so from our experience coaching, thousands and thousands of people below Diamond, the competitive players, or the players that play in teams, they're the hardest people to coach in SoloQ. They're the hardest. They're the most stuck people, and the amount of narratives that you need to break around what they view as important in the game is very difficult. A lot of those people just realize that SoloQ is not for me, and then they just keep playing in the thing, and then they just do their tournaments or whatever. Now, I love that you bring up that whole sort of Jana point and that play, and and what you're saying, Curtis, is that when the community talks about voice comms, they come up with these scenarios that are actually 1% of the entire game. Now, these are big moments, right? It's like a dive. Let's say coordinated a tower dive. That is a really big moment. But League is, at the end of the day, especially for the first 10 minutes of the game, and maybe you disagree with this, Azap, it's a solo game. Everyone's in their lane in 1v1s. Even the support, like 2v2, maybe you could say a little bit. Everyone's playing their individual games. And all the tiny little micro interactions, that trade, that walk up, that clicks that they have to do themselves, that is actually what League is about. An IM player, a silver player, whatever, they're not losing games because of that the dive or whatever it is. They're losing games because they don't know what their champion does. They're not piloting it properly. They're misclicking. They're leveling. They're using their abilities correctly, and that's an all individual thing. You can't communicate that. You can't say, I as this jungler cannot be saying, hey Darius, in this matchup, you should be using your E this way. I'm noticing you doing your E this way. That jungler's not going to say that. A silver player's not going to be saying that. They're clearing their camps. Their mental stack's overwhelmed. So I feel like that the community they live in this fantasy world of where voice comms would be great in certain plays, but in my mind, and from my experience playing SoloQ, those plays are only 1% of actually how you win games in SoloQ.
Now, to add on to this as well, I think, because there was a few other points, and we'll maybe circle back and reconvene here.
I think before you make your next point, I want to give Azap time to respond to what you both have just said. Yeah. So, Azap, any points?
Okay. Let's figure out exactly where the disagreement is coming from, I guess.
So I think just to recap a bit, I think Nathan's main contention was that SoloQ is much less coordination and much more individual.
No, not SoloQ, League of Legends. Even a professional play. It's the amount of a solo game it is insane, especially for the first 10 minutes. I think it's almost purely solo.
And so you're saying that
in terms of the 80% of the game.
Yeah, so you're saying that communication, even if it was there, it's not really going to have an impact on...
It's going to distract.
I think it's going to make players worse.
Well, because I think this is why I wanted to add in here, Charlie, because I think Nathan's point doesn't make sense without this point that I'm about to say. And that's why Azzap, I think... All
right, I'll allow it.
So basically, what Nathan... Correct me if I'm wrong, Nathan. What you're trying to get at is the cost of communication voice comms and solo queue, the burden on the mental stack or like all the other complications will outweigh the quote unquote increase in level of play by having it. That's kind of what you're, because what you're, without having that your argument doesn't really make sense.
Yeah, you want people's focus to be on the micro, and you think comms will take the focus off the micro.
Exactly right. Yes.
Okay. All right. Now that we've got that out of the way, Azzap.
Okay, so that's actually a very interesting way to look at it. I don't necessarily think that's true. I do believe that, for example, like the Jana example and the communication example, saying that you're going to be too reliant on your teammates' communication, that there is a danger. There's a danger of completely ignoring everything unless it's being told to you specifically. There's a danger of live coaching, for example. If you're telling somebody exactly what to do, they don't really get into the habit of thinking for themselves. I don't think this is necessarily like a big danger in terms of the voice chat. In fact, League of Legends is so complex. It's got so many different things in the game that we cannot really consciously perceive it without some certain framework. And the fact that you don't have to be...
quickly come in here. No, just for that point, challenger players are really bad at this because challenger players are doing so many invisible things, like you're saying, Azap, that they're removing all that from that conversation about voice comms. Because challenger players, lanes play out like pretty much the same way, like the whole trading and stuff. Then the big challenge of us when we came from the pro scene and coaching challenger to Iron, we didn't realize how much we knew about the game. It was shocking to us. So that's
Small warning for you there, Nathan.
I get a strike. All right.
Yeah, I'll get to the highest elo as well. What was I saying? Anyway, I think that there's so many variables in the game that it's just really, really difficult for people to conceptualize these things, unless, like, if you're playing the game and you're having to guess X, Y, but even Z and your teammates and everything, it's just going to become this chaotic jumble where you don't really understand anything. In a way, you're slowly developing the intuition, but that's like empirically through playing a bunch of games. It's just you don't consciously perceive the game. Whereas in a way, if you get just tiny bits and pieces of information fed from your teammates, you talked about the coordinated tower dive. That's like the 1% of the play. But I think the communication point is not about that tower dive. It's the setup to the tower dive. How we get there. Can we even tower dive? The whole discussion and communication before about who's moving where, what are the priorities, is enemy mid laner faster, and such. So understanding these things where your teammates give you certain piece of information, then you can focus your you can focus on more narrow things, and you can be more specific in a way how you design a play. I think that would certainly serve to elevate. And I think, like, sure, there is a negative there that potentially, like, relying on the communication could stunt somebody's growth, for example. I think the benefit would outweigh the negative in this case in terms of people becoming better and trying to understand the game, because the game is just, it's so complex right now. I made a recently video about like combinatorics of League of Legends and how many variables there are to account for. And like, unless you're really limiting your champion pool and like your role pool and like your certain champion class pool, like, you really got to limit all of these. These are all limitations, so you don't really have to factor in too many things, so you can focus consciously outwardly on different things. And as it comes to the highest elo, that is true that at the highest level, but this is only true at the highest level, I would say, that there's a lot of these moments where you don't yourself know exactly if it's the right play. You don't consciously perceive it. This is sort of like the ultra instinct level where you're just feeling the game, and the decisions are so rapid that you don't really have time to consciously even process them, because you're doing so many things at once and you're just following this flow. And this is what happens when you're pushing a field to its absolute limit. And I think that's the beauty of the competitive, where you have like teams who, let's say you have a team with one central shot caller. I mean, if you bounce ideas to him, you're going to have some certain delay. You're going to lag in between the decision making. Whereas if you have like G2, 5 wildcards who just all make their own snap decisions, but they learn to trust each other, they can really sway the game through like certain weird macro maneuvers in late game, which is really, really cool to see. I think that's just the feature of the highest levels of play.
All right, so I think I want to circle back to the communication of low elo, and so I want to dissect this a little bit further. So You mentioned an example in Counter-Strike and your little
smokes.
yeah, they're talking about smokes, and there was this play, and then this guy said, okay, you need to smoke this site, and we can take the site or whatever, and you're sitting there like, cool, I don't know, I'm gonna go ahead and do that, right? Now, if you take a look at Counter-Strike, right? Counter-Strike is a way less mentally overwhelming game. And I'm not saying you use Counter-Strike as a perfect example. You said it was just the closest example. But I don't even think we can use Counter-Strike as an example because the speed and pacing of Counter-Strike is significantly lower. Now, the reason I raise this point is because League is a very, very fast-paced game. And so what makes League one of the major reasons League is so difficult, especially in the lower elo brackets, is because the game, so much is happening so quickly that people's mental stack is so overloaded, they can't even remotely look at the minimap half the time because they're in the middle of a trade. Now, I'm a mid lane coach. I look at predominantly mid laners, so I can't speak fully for other roles. But if I'm looking at an average gold player, they can barely even look at the minimap. Like, honestly, for the majority of the lane, because most of my attention as a coach, one of my biggest things that I get people to really focus on is miniature lol state usage, because they're so overwhelmed by matchup understanding, where the hell there's wave, when do I need a reset, where is my jungler, can I die to a gank, where's my, what's going on? Like, they literally don't have the mental capacity to even read the map properly because they're so bombarded by what's in front of their face. So what's going to happen, right? Let's say there's a world in which there's a jungler on comm saying, hey, we got a slow build wave bot, mid lane, let's come dive on this wave. There's no way in a million years that dive is ever going to happen, even if the jungle wanted it to happen, because the mid laner they're not even in a position to even, for starters, know what's going on bot, handle their own, let alone handle their own lane. And even if they do try to go to the play, it's going to be so botched that they would be better off not making the play in the first place. So my point being is that, like, the communication, this is where this discussion gets very theoretical very quickly, because we're thinking of this like perfectly isolated incident where you're setting up a dive. When I look at most players in the lower elo brackets, they don't even know how to take reliably good trades in their matchups. Like if you look at a 2v2, it can swing on a knife's edge. Your Caitlyn Morg's like 2-0, they're popping off, and then randomly the Morg forgets to use Spell Shield and gets hooked by a Thresh, and then their entire lane is just gone. That's the reality. That's what actually happens. So communication in this sense is only going to add additional friction and complication, because that mental stack mental stack is a really valuable resource that needs to be allocated towards doing their job individually. And even for me, I'm going to speak transparently on myself here. If I play Clash with these guys like every few months, my trading goes to shit. My awareness goes to shit, because I'm like, just shut the fuck up, Nathan. I don't want to hear about what you're doing. It's overwhelming for me to even remotely hear what Nathan's saying, because I'm trying to figure out my own situation, let alone, I've been a challenger player for like 10 years. So let alone someone that's in gold or silver. So like, this is where I think that the dangers of SoloQ will massively overcomplicate and add complexity to League of Legends in the lower tiers. That's my main contention there. And why?
Nathan, we're going to skip you. We're going to go back to Azzap.
Sure.
Okay, yeah, I understand. I really, really understand the setup, and I think we have a full understanding on what's happening. I think we're slightly different in the conclusion. You're right in a way where Counter-Strike is slower, has like less beats per minute, let's say, than League of Legends. But wouldn't that be an advantage for League of Legends to have voice chat? Because you can make an argument like, why don't you just type in Counter-Strike? Because the game is so slow, you can type your setup. Whereas in League of Legends, you really don't have time to type in certain scenarios to communicate effectively. And the second point is, like, it is overwhelming. I agree. It's super, super overwhelming. That's why the voice chat would be used as a supplementation to the game, in my mind. For example, the people who yap too much would go down in elo. The game would severely be restructured, because the competitive game and a game where you communicate and band together is completely different from SoloQ. It's different. So we're measuring two different. They're two different categories in a way. So the SoloQ would definitely shift from one pattern to another. But I think the communication would like throw in like evolutionary like iteration process, eventually be grounded down to the bare essentials. I think the best, when you look at the best teams, how they communicate, they don't really say much. They're on the same pace. They have the idea what to do. They're very similar ideas, and they just mentioned the very few key things. So I don't think like people will be doing this sort of like, we're gonna dive them at 3 minutes and 40 seconds. In the meantime, you're gonna shove 3 waves. This is totally unrealistic scenario, because who the hell knows what happens 2 minutes down the line? The game is too chaotic. It's got too many variables. But jungler, if he's in passing, he can say, is it diveable? These guys say yes or no. It's communication. Is middle laner moving? Do they have prio? You know, it's going to be stripped down to the bare essentials over time. Now, initially, we'll have a ton of yappers and we'll have a ton of people who don't say anything. Eventually, I feel like through this process, they will come down to a point where they're most beneficial and productive. And it's also better to play League that way instead of somebody constantly talking in your ear. Like, you're not playing the game with a director's cut, you know? Like, you're still here to play the casual game and like, in a way casual. Like, you want to relax and focus on your own stuff, because everyone understands that League of Legends is very complex. There's many things to focus on. But I think having voice chat, and people will slowly figure out what are the key things that they need to mention, the key essentials, the jungler path, and do we contest this? Like, just the bare essentials. Obviously, there's voice chat for more complicated plays. For example, you completely lost the game. There's no win conditions. Can we all go here, like, and stack in this brush and try to cheese because we cannot win any other way? You know, it's like that's something you can never really do through chat. But voice chat would enable that sort of coordination. But that's the rare case. I think the more obvious case would just be like the beats, you know, like, on this level up we fight, you know, you're just before level 2, right before level 6 on bot lane, for example, or these skirmishes, like if jungler moves in, he just mentions, I'm invading, can you push, or something like that. These are like tiny bits and pieces that people will figure out eventually.
Okay, so what we're going to do now is I want either of you to like steelman that argument completely, right? I want you to talk about what if voice comms were perfect, as Azzap was saying. I want you to critique the perfect form of voice comms. Let's say that it does evolve. Let's say 5 years down the line, everyone is the best communicator. We've got these awesome comms. Everyone's very succinct. Everyone's using the same terminology. We're all aligned. Is that still a negative for the game? Or is that not even possible?
Just before I answer that question,
30 seconds.
30 seconds. I just really think it's important to note that I think you kind of proved the point, though, that what would happen is that people who are bad at communicating would drop in rank, and the people that got good at communication, or got, let's say, the communication got more refined, would climb in rank. So such that what you would get is that the communication would be absolutely dog shit in the lower tiers, and it would be a waste. And so it would be a forcing function whereby inherently the lower elos would always be terrible communication, and it would be as if it shouldn't have existed in the first place, such that in the higher elo brackets it would be a thing. And I would agree with that. I think that communication in the highest elo brackets,
the evolution that you're talking about is that would only happen, that evolution that you're talking about, in like Master, Grandmaster Plus, because those players are playing all the time and like have to think about this. And, you know, as you said, Azap, the fragmentation. So let's say like evolution would actually never happen in my mind, because even if the community, even if after years, because people take breaks from the game, and we see in our programs all the time, new people coming in, breaks. Some people, you know, there might be an option to just mute people, and some people go like, there's going to be no evolution in my mind, right, unless it's in the highest yielders, because there's too many. It's too fragmented.
It's not consistent enough.
Yeah. That can't be the case.
Oh, I think we have to come back to that. I think that's a whole... it's an interesting... I like that. It's an interesting take. But to keep Charles happy here, we should do the steel manning.
Please do.
So steel manning of the whole...
What if comms were perfect?
If comms were perfect, what would it look like? What would it sound like?
If comms were perfect, would that still be a negative? Or would that actually be a positive?
Yeah, and I think... Okay, so this is... Let's say...
We've got to steel man it, Nathan.
Okay, so let's say Riot Games came out with like a masterclass on how to use voice comms and SoloQ, and it was plastered all over the client, and everyone had to watch this video, so everyone knew how to properly use comms and SoloQ, where it was super tight communication, no one's overwhelming, like everyone's like being mouses, like, okay, no flash here, Kimmel has no E, or whatever, like very like tight, clean, cooldown based communication, not overwhelming with crazy macro strategies and all that stuff, right? And we will have to get into what good communication in SoloQ would look like. But if that was the case, I would tend to believe that I wouldn't say it would necessarily be better. It would just be different. So I agree in the sense that it would evolve. League would just be a very different game. It would be a very, very different learning experience. It'd just be a very different game. League of Legends in its current state is like very kind of like brutal. It's very brutal. And so in a way, it probably would smooth out some of the edges of the SoloQ experience. It might make it more pleasant in particular areas. But I you know, even me steel manning it, I think it would just be different. I wouldn't say it would be necessarily better if it was perfected.
Yeah, I mean, you know, you're telling me here, Charles, to live in a perfect world. I'm a realist. I think of, you know, realistic, real situations.
So you're arguing with the moderator.
You
don't like the question.
You don't like the question. I do not live in fantasy land. That is just so far away. It's just impossible. Even your little course and everyone following the course. It's just humans, because I know how flawed humans are. I know how flawed I am. We're not robots, AI here. So I refuse your question, Charlie.
Thank you. Okay, moving on. We're going to take a short break from the whole topic of whether it's like necessarily fantastic or negative, but we're going to talk about roles, because League of Legends is kind of 5 different games, right? We play 5 different roles. As you said earlier, Azzap, Champion Mastery requires you to limit the skill sets that you learn in the game so we can actually develop a sophisticated understanding. So which roles benefit the most from voice comms and which roles benefit the worst? Nathan's written down here, do junglers get it worst? We're going to start with you, Azzap.
Which roles benefit the most? I guess in the short term, you would probably see the most benefits from supports and the junglers, or like vice versa, I guess, in hierarchical order. Junglers would benefit the most because they would have much better communication with the teammates, which would enhance their own playmaking and decision-making, because they're the 2 highest impactful roles to dictate the tempo of the game, right? You have jungle and support. So in short term, I would imagine they would really like it. But in the long term, I think it would be the universe true, because the roles which have the least amount of macro decision-making, again, hierarchical, support, top, and then mid, they have the least amount of knowledge checks and macro checks. They would benefit the most in the long term because their game understanding would deepen. It would broaden by constantly hearing the inputs and the game flow from the roles who are much more like embedded within this decision making.
Nathan,
all right,
you're a jungler.
With jungle Azap. I think that comms. I'm not going to speak for support, but jungle would absolutely ruin junglers. Jungle is already the most by far misunderstood role in the game from laners' perspective, and I'm even saying junglers. Junglers have no idea what we're doing. The amount of so doing a bad gank in League of Legends, just one bad gank, showing it on the map is expensive. We can all agree on that. You know, you give them any jungle options, you're not ideal. You know, wasting time on tempo on camps, not getting back to camps and so on. I coach people, and even my best students who've been going to so many reviews, they always will follow a ping from someone or a laner. They can't help themselves. And this will be amplified with voice comms because every laner has no idea what the jungle is. And everyone wants to play the game. No one wants to be weak-sided. They're going to say they're calling for the jungler help. The jungler will get obliterated. They'll have no idea where to go. They'll be completely overwhelmed. I would say in your scenario here, Azap, where you said junglers will benefit, is if the jungler has so much confidence, is so much higher level than everyone in the game, then the jungler would be really beneficial for voice comms. So they could say, no, I am not ganking your lane. I am finishing my sequence and the enemy jungler's there, so I'm going to recall and go to the other side of the map or whatever. Or like, I'm going to punish the tempo over here. Like, ganking this lane is really bad for you. But junglers have no idea what a good and bad gank is, up until even my Diamond 4 students will do really bad ganks and actually really not know why it's a bad gank of the amount of tempo they lose and how it's not a high quality gank. Like, they don't deny enough experience and gold from it. It's actually not worth to, you know, use your ult and half your HP to kill someone when grubs or dragons spawning in 40 seconds, whatever. They still are learning that sort of thing. So I think junglers will be obliterated. I think, and in doing so as well, you know, junglers are in every game. So like laners are going to get confused. Junglers are going to get confused. No one's going to know what's going on. And we also see this as well for professional play. My observation from watching esports over years, and there's many examples of junglers' careers, junglers that aren't sort of assertive or like more introverted, these players their careers disappear very, very quickly. Very famous examples is like you hear about TSM, like what, TSM did to their junglers. Like all their junglers got obliterated. And that's because if you actually look at all those players, that was sort of very, I'm in the TSM model. I'm just going to do what they say, and junglers get obliterated when they don't play for themselves.
Okay. So Nathan, obviously talking for the junglers of the world, pouring one out for Santorin, Amazing, Mike Young, all these people.
But I will say though, is that, again, even like I always say to my students, is that I'm not confused why the community blames us junglers. We ruin games. I literally did many reviews today saying how you ruin this game for your top laner by ganking into a massive wave, and all your Darius wanted to do was catch the wave, and instead you forced him to come. You got double killed by Teemo. End of review. See you next time. Junglers can have massive impact in the game in the first 10 minutes. That can completely the game's exploded compared to any other role.
Okay, so you take a lot of the blame as a
absolutely
jungler as well.
Yes. I think that's a big problem. Junglers don't take enough blame for their horrendous ganks.
Okay, let's just quickly go deep on mid lane for a second here. We've got two mid laners here. I feel like it would be silly not to. So,
can I just say about what about the jungle point before we move on?
Go on.
I think it's precisely true. Yeah, like the junglers are the most misunderstood, and I think understanding is a two-way street. And I think communication would actually broaden the understanding from, let's say you have a teammate who constantly pings you for ganks. On a voice chat, he will be either less inclined to do so, or if he does that 3 or 4 games back to back and he's just constantly annoying, would you rather see this person lose LP or just continually be in your elo? Like these are the players who, like we talked about the restructuring of the game incentives, and the game would be different. Those people would get punished inherently because they're just causing so much chaos and they're constantly like needing babying. I think understanding of the jungler's perspective is going to be pretty good. And we're not assuming that all players are in really equal skill, so the jungler has to be like better than them or smurfing. I think in general the macro knowledge of the junglers tends to be higher because they have less micro to focus on. People are focusing more on micro in their respective lanes. That's why they're not as attuned to the macro state of the game as junglers are. So they inherently, in the same elo, they should have a slightly higher knowledge. And even if they don't, as long as they're vocal, I think that's going to be a good benefit for the junglers because the understanding would propel upwards. People would know where the jungler is moving, whether he can gank, whether what he can do. I think that's a big net positive.
I want to jump in here, and I guess it segues into mid lane. So, I see your point. Your point being, the people that are poor communicators are going to naturally be punished by the poor communication, such that they're just going to drop. Is that right? Before I go any further.
Well, in relative to the current state, like they would be expected to lose a bit of elo because we're adding another facet to the gameplay. It's like we have these multiple different things that you have to master, and now we added a completely brand new one, and it's going to skew where your average skill lies, whether you're really good at this or really bad at this. So if you're really bad at communicating, it's natural that you would lose some elo.
I see. So I would actually argue that the opposite is true. So what communication I believe would do in this case. So let's use that example. Let's get really specific. The top laner, let's say top laner is playing, let's say they're playing like Darius into, Renekton or something like that. And the Darius has like messed up their early game. The wave is frozen. Renekton is sitting there with like a PTA Ignite. And the Darius is like, I need help. Like jungler, you need to come topside and unbreak this freeze. Otherwise my lane is over. But the jungler already sees the 0-1 Darius and is just like, well, no, I'm going to go bot. Your lane's over. Okay, well, let's role play for a second about what's probably going to play out, right? Well, Darius is it's not like he's going to be, okay, you're right. I'm going to play weak side. Well, he's probably going to get really pissed. He's probably going to vocalize that he's very pissed. And so throughout the game, he's going to influence the jungler in a lot of small ways. I mean, the jungler has two choices, right? He either just mutes, right? The jungler either just mutes straight up. That could happen. But if the jungler doesn't mute, and I see this, a lot of people don't mute, by the way. I mean, just in general, how many people watching this even mute their chat in SoloQ? Very, very few people.
The psychology around that, by the way, is because people want to know what other people are saying about them, right?
Exactly right. Because the top laner could be saying to everyone else, our jungler's so shit, whatever. We'll get to that thing later. What was going to happen, though, is that the jungler is more likely to be influenced by that top laner with voice comms rather than it would be with typing. And pings and typing, there's only so much you can influence that jungler. So, and pings and typing is obviously a hell of a lot easier. I mean, pings especially can easily be muted, but let's say, again, pings and typing versus voice chat. Voice chat would be a hell of a lot more influencing. Therefore, the jungler, it's actually a lot harder for the jungler to be stay resolute, stay focused, and commit to their decision. So what would happen, you're right, it is a whole nother tree and a whole nother variable, but that variable really, really muddies the water in terms of that player expressing their best self and their true skill, because they're getting more heavily influenced from an external source. Now you times that by 5 on your teammates. Everyone's talking, everyone's influencing each other. So it's actually harder to differentiate skill because of how much we're influencing each other. There's so much more combinations and influences impacting what I'm going to do on the Rift. And the great thing about the model of SoloQ right now is because I don't have to hear anyone's shit and what they want to do. I go in there, I make a decision, and it's on me. It's on me. And now, sure, like, pings and typing influence people's, decision-making. And that is actually the bane of most people's existence. One of the biggest reasons why people get stuck in SoloQ is compensation. My jungler pinged for this gank. I didn't want it, but because my jungler's in the area and pinged it, I had to go for it. That's only going to get 2 times, 3x, 5x worse with voice comms. And so my contention there, just to summarize, is that voice comms would add complication, would actually lower the differentiations in skill and actually be harder for the system to differentiate true skill levels. So people would plateau harder. People would be stuck at elo brackets for longer periods of time. And I guess the last point there, many forms of good communication would be overridden by 1 or 2 poor forms of communication. So all it takes is 1 or 2 forms of poor communication to undo many, many good instances of communication.
So I guess part of what you're saying is that the skill that will be trained and rewarded is more the ability to ignore people than actually communicate well.
Yes, exactly right. And that would be that. And so we're going to all this effort to add voice comms, but then the skill that would actually have to be mastered is when to ignore people and how to.
It's like a completely different skill.
It'd be a new skill would be added into the game. It was like, how do you learn to mute and ignore and stay resolute, which is kind of what we already have to do in SoloQ. It's just made 10 times harder. I think the experience of SoloQ would be way less comfortable, way more complicated, and just a less enjoyable.
Too much compensation. And by you saying that, actually, now, as Azap says, jungle and support thinks that you're better. Now you saying that, I think supports and jungles will have it the worst because you're already the compensation role in a way. Like laners by nature, the people who even play lane, especially AD carry, mid, top, they're in general more selfish, like more carry players. You think about Yasuo, Katarina, they'll be way more inclined to the type of people that I see in the jungle and especially support, especially the majority of the player base. I would say they're more inclined to compensate by far than other roles.
Yeah, the less confident type people, 100%.
But I would say you in challenge, as I playing Valkyrie support run around, you could macro your team. It will be very beneficial for you. Like I could see that 100%, and even for me as well. Yeah. As a jungler, I would very confidently say to my mid laner that is not gankable. I am not ganking that. I will literally lose the game if I gank that, and I'm going to go.
And it ties into the whole idea that high elo comms would be better than low elo comms.
Exactly
right. But before we go any deeper on this, Azap, so what we're talking about is like the idea of saying no to a play. And something that we talk about a lot on the podcast and a lot in our coaching is the importance of saying no and how that's literally one of the most crucial, if not like the most crucial skill in the game.
League, yeah.
Does that resonate with you? Do you see this in your games? Do you see this in other people's games? Like what's your thoughts on the whole idea of the importance of saying no?
Okay, let's break it down. I agree with the point. It would be more complicated. The game would become more complicated. That is certain because the peak potential of the gameplay would be higher. The net gameplay quality would be higher. It just really depends what you're maximizing for. And we're going to be in a different sort of environment, different game. For example, this specific Darius situation where you have you have this communication problem where one guy is trying to influence the other. I think that like we're assuming we're taking players from never having voice chat to instantly having voice chat, and they would like flop. In a way, they kind of would initially, but I think the upward curve would really go higher. And for example, I've done jungle unranked to master. I think quite recently, maybe half a year ago, something like that. And yes, exactly. Like you really need to learn how to be resolute in a way to make your own decision as a jungler, put a bet on it. Like, I believe this is going to work. I'm going to full clear into grubs. I'm going to do this. Only deviate from the path if it really, really is obvious in a way. So you learn to become more conscious and more resolute in this way. And I think the voice chat is actually going to make it a bit better because you will be able to humanize your jungler. Your jungler will be able to respond. Like, for example, Darius is losing and jungler is going to say, I think our highest chance to win is to play for bot here. And he might disagree with that, the Darius. Maybe he won't. Maybe we'll understand. Maybe he won't, at the end of the day. But I think that would hone people in a way where they would have to become more resolute over time. They will have to become more confident in their own ideas and plays compared to the voice chat. And if you have like two different universes side by side, or like run a billion simulations, once without voice chat, once with the voice chat, I would much rather have the voice chat one, because the toxicity and the disagreements that you assume happening in the voice chat one are also happening in the chat log one, except that the Darius is now sitting under turret and typing. Like, why is my jungler going down to the? Why is he not doing this? Whereas this way, jungler has a chance to actually be humanized and respond to him, and he's going to propose a different idea. He's not ignoring him because he's trolling him. He's not ignoring him because he hates him. It's not a personal reason. He just thinks this is a better play. And in a way, you get to combat that. You kind of have to, like, people will understand that, oh, this is not a solo queue game. This is not like a single player game. We're actually 5 different unique beings, 5 different players, and everyone's got their own ideas. This jungler has an idea. I can't really fault him that much for it. Like, it's obviously like idealistic sort of notion, but like it is going to happen incrementally. And I do believe in that evolution. And even if we assume that the low relo will communicate more poorly, which is true, that will be an aspect of it. If somebody communicates just slightly better than the others, people will learn from it. They will get better. If somebody, like, the incremental process is superb, the evolution will happen if somebody is just slightly better and has slightly more knowledge and is communicating that to the teammates, compared to zero communication where nothing is conscious, everything stays foggy, and nobody does anything for a particular reason, which means you don't really think things through. You just play the game out through the motions without feeling any sort of impact or control.
So on the topic of humanizing teammates, right? Because we're kind of touching on toxicity, which is often brought up in the voice comms debate, right? So it sounds like you're saying that things might be less toxic with voice comms when people get humanized. Okay. Is that your contention?
Wait, before we move on to, I really want to move on to the humanizing and toxicity, but yeah, please, I really want to like harp on the point of like knowledge checks and stuff, because I think something that is a really important point to mention here is this whole idea of like the blind leading the blind. And so like, again, we have to bring it back to how learning works in League. And I said at the very beginning, there's a feedback loop, okay? And so the feedback loop, the way League works and why it's such a beautiful game in its current state is because the feedback loop is purely on you. You have to make the decisions. You get punished for the consequences, and you're only influenced by pings and typing. And so what happens in the lower tiers, let's say Silver. Let's use Silver as an example, right? One of the most biggest, largest rank brackets. Silver and Gold. Most of those players in those ELO brackets, they don't have very sophisticated knowledge of the game, right? And so what you've got is that if a jungler is getting asked about something in top lane, they're not going to have the knowledge to understand whether or not, a lot of the time, whether or not how bad a play is or not. And if someone sounds convincing, right, and say they get convinced, and they get their arm twisted and they go for a play and it doesn't work, then the problem is then who's to blame? Who gets the learning, right? The jungler doesn't get that learning, do they? Because the reality is that they're going to be thinking, oh, that was just my dumbass top laner's call. They're not going to take accountability for that decision. Because as soon as someone else pings something and then you go to that play, you're not taking accountability of that for that play anymore. You're putting the onus on them, right? And then and the reality is that like people really struggle with taking accountability for errors in League of Legends, and I think it's only going to get made worse from communication. And when people start influencing other people's decisions, the feedback loop gets so complicated. You've got so many variables at play that I think it just adds so much complicated. Like, what are you really learning?
Yeah, the learning falls apart.
The learning falls apart because, like, what it takes to get from silver to gold, like, as a mid laner, actually has nothing to do, really, with anyone else's job. Like, I don't give a flying fuck what my top lane is doing. I don't care what my bot lane is doing. I don't even really care, for the most part, what my jungler is doing. I just need to get good at dealing damage with my champion. I need to understand what my champion's reference points are. I need to start developing my matchup understanding. And I need to just have a rough awareness of where my jungler is. I don't actually even need to know all this information about what's going on top or what's going on bot. And if I did get the information, that's going to really overcomplicate my job and what I need to do. And so I think that you're right. In the higher ELO brackets, that communication is going to help add, you know, you're going to be able to fill in knowledge gaps because you already know your job. I already know my role. I already know what I need to do. So it's like that getting all of that knowledge, that baseline knowledge to get to the higher ELO brackets will be so much harder. So again, the trade-off, again, for the high skill cap, we have mass complexity. But with max complexity, you just get this, I think with League, as it's already so goddamn complex, the game will become too complex. Learning will become so hard that it will almost borderline be unfun in a way. Like League is already borderline too hard. I mean, that's something that Riot have already, everyone's, you know, a big critique of Riot is like how the game is too hard for people.
Or the players base is getting better, and it's just the barrier to entry is really high.
So like I think that again, this is where it all comes back full circle to the whole idea of like I can see your point of it being very effective in the higher ELO brackets.
I'll even say with Azap, it's not even just for the high effective for the higher ELO brackets. I definitely think that in the case that Azap's talking about there is like the jungler theoretically can learn from that situation where that dive goes wrong and takes accountability for it. Curtis is saying that person probably won't take accountability for it. I think that because you're in such a learning mindset, Azap, I think you're unique. I don't think that's... You know what I mean?
We're all outliers.
We're all outliers. Yeah, exactly
the average person doesn't have, in League of Legends, doesn't have that mentality.
Also, by the way, Azap, like we're talking about that one situation, right? I reckon the way that would play out is that jungler would, you know, go there, makes, you know, a game, you know, game ruining play or whatever. And then, you know, let's say that they do learn from that, right? Guess what? They actually, what I see is they forget about that whole play because the game goes to 25 minutes. And then in their mind, the way the game was lost was that 25-minute team fight.
Yeah.
Because people don't weigh plays and like, you know, the same value that sort of we do. We know how bad a 8-minute, you know, failed tower dive is for the outcome of the game. But in terms of learning the game, no one actually realizes how bad that is for the game. Like how bad.
So the reason this is important, last point here before we go back to...
30 seconds. It's turning into Broken by Concept episode 1 over here.
Sorry. The last point is that, in a way, I think this would decrease, the effect of this, it would actually decrease people's individual skill level. I think actually what would happen if you run two timelines, two alternate realities, right? Let's we have alternate reality A where voice comms are enabled and alternate reality B where voice comms are disabled. The net skill of the players in alternate reality A up until, let's say, 95% of the player base will actually be worse. The individual play, the level of play will be lower, and if voice comms never got enabled, those individual skill would actually be higher. Because again, the quality of the learning will actually be inherently more brutal and you'll be able to take more accountability. There's less influence, less complexity, which allows you to really dial in what's actually really important. And that's obviously a bold claim. We have no idea if that would be the case, but that's
yeah.
That
well, I would.
Nathan, we got to go to Azap.
Wait. I'll stand by that claim because League is an individual game over a team game.
Understood. So Curtis is running he's getting alternate realities. Azap's running 500 simulations. We're going out to lunch here a little bit, guys. So
Sorry.
We're going to end up we're going to close out the learning topic now. We're going to end Azap's thoughts on the learning topic because I know you said earlier you actually think it'd be more beneficial for lower ranks to learn more, and these guys seem to think that it's going to be way more beneficial for higher ranks. They've already yapped a lot, Azzap. I just want to give you one more opportunity to talk about the learning aspects before we talk about toxicity. So do you have any closing thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's the opposite. Again, we have no way to tell. This is just my intuition speaking. I think it's the opposite. I think the higher elos have less to communicate about, less to learn about, uh, because they're already at like playing at 90% game efficiency at super high elo. So I don't think they would improve as much with the communication, especially because the other team would also be communicating. It would be very, very difficult to break the armor. People would kind of remain on the same ideas, and it would come down to this individualistic differences in plays that are going to break the game. Uh, Whereas lower elo, I think it's like I think we can even simplify it. You have two different situations happening. Let's say you have people, the same exact scenario: jungler and a top laner interacting. Jungler pings for a play, kind of ish. They sort of follow the play. Play fails, whatever. Okay, if you have voice comms and jungler calls for that play specifically, top laner follows, the play goes south. Okay, in which of these two instances you would imagine would be like, you're assuming all silver players are kind of arrogant and clueless. I don't think you give them enough credit. I understand we're in a way outliers because the learning mentality and adapting over time and like the selection bias of how we bubble up to the surface. But I don't think it's blind leading the blind. I think it's slightly less blind leading the blind. In a way, there would be improvement because the play in a voice communication universe would be much more conscious in my mind. So it'd be easier to memorize, it'd be easier to ponder over, and easier to arrive to conclusions. And it is still an individualistic game. I'm not assuming that now it's just a 5v5 and we're a team, we're buddies, we're best friends because we met in SoloQ one game. You're still your own individual. So over time, you would be developing yourself more and more to become more sturdy, more robust person and confident. Compared to like your teammates, but you would also be developing your communication skills. And my bet is if you run a bunch of these, that the universe that has voice comms would be slightly higher percent chance to learn from the play. The slightly less higher chance of the jungler to understand, okay, I call this consciously, my bad. Or the top laner, I follow this call, my bad. Because he followed the call. He failed to assess the call and tell him don't do it. So I like that's my bet. I think within a year or two, post adding the voice chat, I think we'd have like the highest skill level in League of Legends ever. I think that's my point. That would be my prediction if I had to bet.
Yeah.
So like by making communication more overt, it'll be easier to take accountability for following a call. But at the moment, if you follow a call, it's kind of like, yeah, I guess I listened to a little ping, but now it'll be really obvious.
Okay,
right?
so there's
Precisely.
There's one giant flaw in the reasoning here, right? This is really, really important. It's a giant flaw. We're automatically assuming that the learning is obvious. And 99% of the time, the learning is not obvious.
True.
Okay.
I just think it's just a bit more obvious on this side than on this side because people are more likely to think it over what went wrong.
I don't
because
think so.
It's marked in their brain slightly more than just a play that's vague.
We got to get specific. That case of, let's say, the Darius is behind, and remember, everyone has different skill sets. Top laners traditionally over-index in mechanical skill and micro and trading and all that stuff. Junglers typically more cerebral, right? So what would happen, right? Not majority of the time. Again, we've run this simulation many times. The Darius goes to this, calls the play. The jungler comes over, and maybe the Jarvan misses EQ. And the Jarvan misses EQ. And so in the Darius's mind, the Darius is like, oh, but you missed the EQ, mate. You know what? This play would have worked if you just hit the EQ. The Jarvan's thinking, this play fucking sucks. Even if I hit that EQ, there's no way we're going to win that. So now what you've got is a dilemma. Is the learning that the EQ should have hit, and if the EQ would have hit, the play would have been great? Or is the play just fundamentally bad because you're already losing them behind and Jarvan should have been on the other side of the map? Now, we don't have time to discuss the learning here. We have no idea. We can't sit there and review that play. We're respawning in 5-10 seconds. We got to make the next decision. So because of the communication, voice comms will actually make the learning less clear because you're going to have two strong opinions about and they don't have the game knowledge to even know which one was right or wrong. And this is what I always say in my reviews with people. We got to review it through a micro macro lens. We got to take a look at it through mechanically, and then we can look at the big picture. You don't have time to do that. I can't discuss with Joe Blow if that was a micro or macro problem. I just got to move on. And so the reality is that, like, I think because of the influence of the voice comms, it's actually just making it so hard. It's too theoretical that we're going to be able to hash it out together in that moment. And like, the learning is it's just not going to happen like that. It's too messy.
I will give Azap room to respond to that because we're extending this portion of the conversation. So Azap, were you talking about people hashing it out, or were you talking about kind of learning in a different way?
No, learning happens post things when you think about them, really, when you consciously observe them. And I think it's more likely that you consciously observe it when you have like a vocal disagreement. Let's say that happens and you say you clearly missed your EQ, right? So you're thinking it's a mechanical failure, he's thinking it's a macro failure. I think the end result of what happens here is they both ponder it over a bit more consciously and a bit more after than they would usually. I think in a regular text chat scenario, that would be fighting till the end of the game because he missed the EQ and it's a bad mechanical play. In a voice chat scenario, I think that's a bit more humanizing element. This guy cannot say that he didn't miss it. He can be mad about it. He can even project and externalize the problem by being annoying. But it's also it's also defeatist in a way, because later on, if he ever decides to review his behavior, he will understand that his own over defensiveness was clearly an admission of mistake. So they both will have higher chance to learn in this scenario than the other way around. And I think the game has better likelihood of being a success in a voice chat because it's easier to go over that mistake instead of like having to type about it for the rest of the game. Now, again, this is super theoretical. We have no way to assess what would be the scenario. I think this is just my intuition going. I'm trying to back it up with like some sort of form of understanding. We clearly differ in ideas here. And again, I think like if we like, depending on which portion of the year of the season we implement the voice chat, I think in a year or two post voice chat, the game would be like the highest quality it's ever been in terms of like gameplay.
All right, we just segue into the humanizing and socializing.
Yeah, we have to move towards toxicity because like you said, Isaac, we have different ideas. Yeah. But one thing we can all agree on is Jarvan's miss EQs, right?
I mean, I've lost so many games from missing EQs.
I hate that guy.
So, toxicity. Do we think that voice comms will increase, decrease, impact, not impact toxicity? We're going to repeat. We're going to yo-yo back to Azap here. What do you reckon,
awesome. Yeah, toxicity is a funny one. Toxicity is a very, very difficult one. This is probably the most difficult aspect of adding the voice chat because there are two notions here. There are two main differences. Okay, so when you have anonymous chat, people are more likely to be aggressive, more likely to flame each other, more likely to find disagreements, right? If you just put like a text chat with a picture of a person, you're less likely to flame. If you know that person is a streamer, a VTuber, you're even less likely to flame. If you know that he's a streamer with a real face and like he's visible, it's even less likely. And then if you have voice chat and you're communicating with each other, it's even less likely. So I would think that the shallow form of flame would go down. But there's a problem here where with the voice chat, that's another part of yourself. That's another personal element that's brought in. So communication within voice chat tends to be less toxic, but more harsh when it is actually toxic. So let's say certain marginalized people, non-conformist people would really, you can perfectly like assume that their experience could diminish in certain ways. And I fully understand that. And like, I cannot advocate for those people. I cannot be like, from my own position, say like, you're fine, just mute all. I can't say that. I can't say that to those people. It's kind of theirs to advocate for or against in a way. And it's just, I can understand. I can understand like the moral convictions that can bring up to the argument of not having the voice chat. But it really depends what you're trying to min-max. Like, how do you value some person suffering a bit more versus a bunch of people suffering a little bit less? How do you quantify that in a way where it's like, okay, you want game quality, but you're also going to make somebody suffer. It's like it's a very difficult balancing scale, and we don't really have a proper way to decide because we don't have infinite knowledge in a way. You can just look at what is the general consensus, how do other games work, and I think majority of the games, the consensus has been made for a really long time that voice chat is generally in games. That's just how it is. League of Legends is one of the rare outliers that doesn't have it, because when the League of Legends came out, it wasn't mandatory to have it, because there was no Dota 2. There was no like unified Dota idea. There was no previous Counter-Strike that you had to combat. For example, when they released Valorant, it helps that it's the same exact company. So the company cannot say, oh, we're not doing it because of toxicity. It's clearly monetary reasons from Riot's perspective, because they looked at it and it's like, okay, Valorant must have voice chat because Counter-Strike has voice chat. We cannot compete with them without the voice chat. So it's just the standard norm they have to do it. If Dota came out before, or Dota 2, and they had the voice chat, League of Legends would certainly have voice chat. I think it's as simple as that from their perspective.
So Nathan, we're going to go to you here.
All right, so humanizing.
So League of Legends is like widely regarded as one of the most toxic games, and they don't have voice chat.
Yeah.
So how would you respond?
Okay,
because that would tend to suggest that voice comms reduces toxicity because all the other games have it, and they're quote unquote less toxic. Yeah. What do you reckon?
All right, love this. All right, I'll be able to go a bit of a rant here. Okay, so voice comms, yes, so will humanize the game, and I will say I reckon it will be way less toxic. I think Azap, definitely there is that sort of niche scenarios where, you know, you can't, it's like the famous COD lobbies, right? Where people do the COD lobbies and like, you know, your mum's this or whatever it is, right? You know what I mean? Like that, but I think that's, honestly, I think that's quite rare scenarios. I think people are, you know, quite level-headed. So what we have in League, and I'm a firm believer of this compared to other games, we have League has the best rank system, the most competitive gaming play base of all time ever compared to any other game. And that, I think, is attributed to SoloQ, being SoloQ without voice comms. So I think that is the pro, and I think that is why League has sustained the way it has, in a way, where other people think that voice comms is what's, you know, is going to come back to save it. I think that people don't realize that what we have now is awesome. We have the most competitive, sophisticated, ranked video game play base of all time ever. That's what I believe. And that's, I think, what we've seen in terms of especially the rank system. So will it humanize things? Yes. Will it reduce toxicity? Yes. But I think that is a bad thing because the competitiveness of the game will be ruined. As we're sort of saying, Curtis and I believe, that this learning slows down massively and everyone gets way worse.
Yeah, interesting perspective. So you're just happy to keep that level of toxicity in favor of the competitiveness.
Yes. I don't want, it's so, SoloQ is so beautiful to me. It's so like,
you think it's very pure.
Pure.
Right?
It's such a pure experience of challenging yourself. Like that's what the Broken by Concept and our coaching in SoloQ is. It's a challenge of yourself, and you can learn so much about yourself. It's such a good game to develop a growth. It can be a very bad game for a lot of people, for a certain amount of people, but it can develop a growth mindset because, you know, me, you know, sitting in my room, solving my problems without people in my ear has been one of the best experiences for my life. And so many people have written in, you know, how amazing the SoloQ experience has been, how it's changed their life, how it's changed their perspective. I think that voice comms hurts that purity significantly.
Okay, so Azzap has already spoken quite a bit about how he doesn't agree that it's going to reduce the competitiveness of the game. Do you have anything to add on that? I don't think we've spoken about necessarily competitiveness. I
think the competitiveness and the learning thing are tied in my mind. I think we've already sort of talked about that topic. Yeah.
I mean, I'll just give you an opportunity, Azzap. Do you have anything to say about the competitiveness? Is that different than learning, or do you view them the same?
Yeah, I just don't know, like, really how to measure the competitiveness of League of Legends compared to other games. I think it's a very vague concept. League of Legends is super successful, but it's because it's just an incredible game that came at the right time, and it really propelled esports forward. I really don't know how to measure the competitiveness. I still maintain that the competitiveness would not be hindered as much by voice chat. I think there is an interesting idea there, albeit a bit controversial, with the whole well, if you leave a bit more toxicity, a bit more harassment, there's that fuels the motivation. It's kind of like the Spartan upbringing sort of idea where you're honing somebody by being
high pressure, you know, pressure,
them, you know?
Diamonds. You know, what's the saying? Pressure makes diamonds, right?
Yeah, yeah. I can potentially see that. But then again, like competitive people will be competitive. Some people will drop out due to toxicity and never get into the game in the first place. So you can make an argument that your funnel, you're kind of closing the funnel. Less people come in, so the less potential super competitive people will bubble up to the surface because of your more aggressive approach to that. So if let's say we have a more welcoming environment, more people come in, more competitive people bubble up to the surface. So that can also be an argument to be made there. I'm not really sure how strong that is, but again, it's super highly theoretical. Can't really get any like super confirmations. Like,
I guess linked to toxicity is the idea of like peer pressure, right? What if someone doesn't want to use voice comms? What would the culture be like around that? Do you think that people will feel really pressured and like they'll be kind of outcast for not using voice comms? Do you think that could potentially hold people back? What if someone literally doesn't want to talk? Or what about people who maybe don't speak the language of the people that they're on the server of? Like, what do you make of that? We'll go to Azzap again.
Yeah, I think the same thing would happen like in a bunch of other games. Some people don't have microphones, some people don't know the language, some people don't communicate. It doesn't mean that they don't partake in the conversation. They still understand what the other people are saying. They can hear them in a way, and they can still base their decisions off of it. Again, still maintaining the consciousness argument of improving and learning how the game flows and the entire game dynamic. So I think that's fine. And like there will be a way where your elo would be slightly less than it would without communicating, but I don't think it would be like a major shift. We're talking about this as it would be like night or day. I think the game would remain, quite a lot of it would remain the same. It's just that the voice chat have to learn how, like, people have to learn how to incorporate the voice chat properly within the framework of playing League of Legends. It will still maintain a solo game, especially because the game has been rooted in solo culture for 15 years. I think now shifting to voice chat would be kind of radical. It would be kind of wild. People would not really know what to do with the voice chat in the first place. So I think that they wouldn't use it that much. Like a lot of people would casually join in the voice chat. A lot of people would be like, some people would try hard, but that's like super rare. I think some people would be super vocal, but majority would just be like slowly like dipping their toes in, trying to converse in a way. And I think we just slowly benefited the community in terms of like the game quality.
We'll come back to the implementation. We'll definitely ask about that in a sec. Okay. But Nathan's dying to say something.
Okay, so talking about so the rank system again, and a bit that the short term, I feel like communication and voice comm is so attractive. You always see those in-house servers pop up ASAP, right? Everyone tries to get in-houses started. Even, the pro players, or like, let's say people, why do they always die out? Why is the voice comms aspect, it's always sexy at the beginning, but why do you think that they just die out because they just don't have a proper rank system and it's just too hard to organize? Like, or do you think that voice comms could have some impact there?
I've been invited to many of those. I really like it. It's so tempting. It's so, you really want to do it.
Sexy idea, right?
It's just that it's like ran as a third party. Like nobody cares about it. There's no real incentive. There's no real reward. You're just essentially wasting your time compared to the regular ladder, or like for a streamer in a way where you're playing like something wildly different that you don't know if it's going to work. It's experimental, and it's just weird, If Riot Games did it in a way where they had this like, okay, you hit master, you have super server with everyone on voice chat, and you have like reward structure. You get challenger jackets, you get monetary prize for rank 1 or whatever. Like that would just propel, I think, the competitiveness.
Yeah, like I would just say, I think it probably, definitely would humanize SoloQ. Like I would agree. I think it would probably, for the majority, have positive social elements. And positive, potentially even positive net enjoyment, I would even say, for the majority. And again, so in this specific topic, I think in this specific regard, I think in the short term, it may be quite toxic, but I think over time that toxicity would diminish, I think. And I think like Riot would find ways to monitor it, and the culture would kind of get reined in. So I'm not going to go on other topics. In this specific topic, I would agree.
Why can't Riot just figure out a team product or a voice comms product? Why can't SoloQ just be SoloQ as it is? And why can't they figure out the whole voice comms?
Well, they
team
killed
thing?
Ranked Fives.
Yeah.
Nathan. They killed Ranked Fives for a reason. You'd assume they have pretty good data on why they did that, right?
Yeah, and so like I think this whole argument so far, before we move on to the next topic, is this hinging on one critical idea. And the critical idea is that, Azapp is believing that with voice comms, there is going to be more learning and
Playbase will be better.
The playbase will be better. And we believe that with that added complexity to the learning cycle, it would actually decrease the individual level of play, and it would actually potentially stagnate elements of play. That's the fundamental difference. So I think there's no point harping on that. I think we just now go further into other topics.
I'll be handling the debate. Thank you very much.
Okay, sorry.
Trying to be moderator.
I was actually putting a selfish comment. That was purely for myself. So what the hell's going on?
You were trying to restructure.
Yeah, I'm trying to restructure.
No, we are going to restructure. Don't worry. We're going to reassess now. We're going to talk about the concept of risk. So,
Wait. I'm sorry to come in here, Charles.
You're on thin ice.
No, because the comments will say, why did you not talk about girls and women in voice
Azap
comms?
addressed that.
Yeah, he did at the start.
Azap addressed that. I mean,
marginalized communities.
It's going to be worse. I think it's just generally agreed that is the case, but it's not our conversation to have.
If you're a woman, if you have let's say if you're a man with a feminized voice, or you're a girl with a more masculine voice, if you're a child, if you have squeaky voice, all of this is a potential target because you're adding a own personal layer to it. So you can become a potential target to the gold for flamers who are really mad about their own performance and don't know how to expel that aggression, so they just externalize, and they will yap about the stupid comments. And I think eventually through the voice chat again, they would realize that they're being stupid, and all of that. You can even get into the learning curve of that and the socialization, how people would get socialized a bit better due to the implementation of the voice chat. But there's just a never-ending supply of them because the new people are turning 11 every year, So it's just a never-ending thing.
Well, I will say
it's kind of. I'm sorry, I just want one more thing. It's just really it's kind of cynical to say it will happen. There's nothing you can do about it in a way, but generally there's just infinite people coming, and it's just not. You can only kind of skew it in a way, but you can socially kind of it's just a long social process, I guess, of acceptance and understanding.
Well, I will say this is a personal topic to me because I've been scarred actually by really badly, and I grew up playing Counter-Strike from a young age, and I was abused massively, and to the point where I was terrified to speak on microphone. Even I'm just trying to win the game. I never was toxic. I literally was just trying to make calls and communicate. But I got abused. I got literally bullied, cyberbullied, and it was quite traumatic, to be honest with you. So because I had quite a squeaky voice up until I was
Curtis did hit puberty.
Yeah, pretty old, to be honest.
Yeah.
So I actually will feel pretty bad. This is I don't think it's something we could just. We are skimming over it, but I actually think it is really bad. It is. It adds a.
Forgetting all those people, is it just going to be really hard? You can't play League unless you're an 18-year-old deep voice male.
Yeah.
Just completely the barrier to entry.
And also, we already know as well, just from the women's perspective, how marginalized they are in the League community.
And gaming in general.
And gaming in general. I think they're already, just get absolutely shit on in many areas. So that's
when people know that they're
the amount of creeps that message them and add them and DM them, it's just going to get out of control, in that regard. So yeah, I think it's important that we really emphasize that is a big pain point.
Yeah, and the barrier to entry to the game, and inclusivity and all that.
Yeah. So
yeah, I agree wholeheartedly, which is why I can't really advocate in an absolutist manner for yes to voice chat or no to voice chat. It's just it's a sliding scale of things, and I really can't speak for all people whether it's going to be more enjoyable experience. I can only speak from my personal privileged and biased perspective in a way in this sort of online realm. And yeah, everyone's got their own opinion. It really matters to what Riot Games is aiming to optimize, what they're aiming for. So I just find this is one side notion here that Riot Games is if anyone tells you Riot Games is the moral or they're trying to optimize the less toxicity, I'm pretty sure that's just a bold-faced lie. We don't humanize companies. Company wants to make profit. If I can make if I'm this infallible marketing guy and I go in and make a presentation to Riot Games that adding voice chat, although some people would suffer from it, it would increase your next year quarter by 7% revenue to shareholders, they would just jump on it. They would instantly jump on it. It's a minor investment, boom, they get so much money in the long run. They would do it. I can totally believe, I know certain people in Riot, for example, like Riot August is made about claims about this, or Riot Emissary, and these people, I can totally understand people working within Riot having moral conviction and understanding towards these communities, but then to assume that a company does it because that is just, I don't think company like cares. Company like as itself, it just doesn't care. So I think for them, it's just specifically because it would be different. They would have to invest to implement it. The client is super shitty. They would have to use money to do it, a lot of money, and they would have to like figure out how to work around recording microphones and the laws of different countries, and how you transcribing audio from transcribing speech from audio is usually an arduous task, which costs a lot of money, even with the modern AI. So it's definitely like a cost thing analysis for Riot Games.
Yeah, I think we'll come back to Riot right at the end. I do just want to touch on this idea of like risk inside the game before we maybe talk about like Riot's, I guess, fiduciary risk on whether they introduce voice comms or not. So yeah, just back to in-game for a second. In Clash, people generally take less risks, right? You see this even in competitive play, like lower tier competitive play outside of maybe like the Asian regions. The games are generally pretty slow, right? We spoke about like full clear junglers, people trading less in lane. You might have had this experience, as if you've ever played Clash, that people generally just are pretty high HP, not much is going on, right? Do you think that SoloQ might turn into this and people take less risks if this happens,
Yes.
if we introduce voice comms? Like, and aren't risks what create great mechanical players?
Yes, I agree. In a way, League of Legends would shift in a more methodical chess-like experience, less of a skirmisher. Some people don't like that. Some people like that. I'm making my own argument that I prefer where the game is more tactical in a way and less decided by a random initiation by a random person who shifts your entire game into like, now you're in this room. Yeah, I think in a way, if you ever try to play with the teammates, with the competitive side of things, you know that the game is way slower. Everything is accounted for. You know where all the wards are. You know where all the flashes are. Like, what are the timers? You know where the jungle is. Like 90% of the time, you really understand and think through the processes. Like you figure out what to do, and you're not winning the game. For now, SoloQ is like all about randomness. Like everything is random, chaotical, and if you're stable yourself, you will control the chaos and climb. Like we talked about a mid laner climbing, and like in current state, you can just not die and farm. You will climb. You will get the diamond. Like just by doing absolutely nothing in a game. Pick a control mage, farm the mid lane, do absolutely nothing, don't die, be stable, you climb. That doesn't really propel your game knowledge. You're essentially cheesing the game in a way. Because
I've got to jump in here. It's the only time I'm going to do this in the whole episode, but I have to jump in. Curtis, respond.
Oh,
we got to respond to that. Yeah.
Well,
okay. First one there, Azapp's talking about the game's random.
Yeah. So the game
SoloQ is inherently chaotic.
Yeah. So this is really fascinating because this ties back to the initial contention about where comms will make players worse, because nothing in League is random.
No, it's very
actually
structured,
the opposite.
Extremely structured in every rank.
Everything actually happens for a reason.
Everything makes sense.
When you think it's random, it's just because you don't understand. People don't understand it. So an example would be like, oh, my jungler randomly got caught, or my mid laner randomly got caught here on mid wave. It's just no. It's because their mental stack was overwhelmed with their trades, and maybe they didn't have the right threat. Their wave was pushed up, and they're versing a jungler that has kill threat, and they have no flash, and so a jungler's skill is the ability to read that state without even hearing any information and understanding why their mid laner is vulnerable in that particular scenario, and then already coming up with a decision about how to respond to that. It's like, my mid laner is probably going to die here. You know, I can ping them, but if they don't, well, there's only so much I can do. I can't be there. What's my next play?
And that's structured.
So it's instantly gone from one person may think that's a random death to another person we think, oh, that actually makes perfect sense. Now, what is my decision? And so League in its current state, it's actually less so random. It's just chaotic.
I think those things are two different things.
And and so it's chaotic and it's fast paced. And so I would argue, time back to, Charles here, the moderator, mentioned risk. Where growth happens in League is when you're under a lot of stress and you're having to you're in very difficult situations, and you're having to try and figure out a solution it's on you to try and figure out a solution in a very high stress environment. When everything is laid out in front of you, I know where the jungler is, and there's less chaos. My mental stack it's like a muscle that will actually atrophy because it's actually not being put under as much stress. So I would argue that, again, let's say you got a Clash game that is played out with these 10 champions and a SoloQ game that is played out with the exact same 10 champions, and all those players are the exact same rank. The players in the game in SoloQ would learn more because they're forced to adapt to all of these scenarios and understand intuitively and develop a very sophisticated mental stack to know if a support has to be able to read what's happening mid. A support has to know where the jungler is. A support has to be able to know if the enemy support's on a roam timer. There's more information that needs to be gathered and understood at a personal level without being handed to me on a platter. And that inherently makes me a better player because I'm forced to figure it out myself, and I can naturally develop a much deeper understanding of the game. And in comms, if I'm getting fed that on a platter, I don't have to learn that myself. It's already literally being given to me, which ties into my initial point at the very beginning of this episode, which is that this is why Clash players or amateur competitive players are just worse at the game, because they're so reliant on other people feeding them information. They're worse in mechanically. They're worse in skirmishes. They're worse in their problem solving. They have a way less sophisticated mental stack. They can't problem solve chaotic scenarios. When skirmishes play out in a weird way, they struggle to adapt if it's not a clean front to back. So this idea of risk and stress and chaos breeding skill is one that I believe is inherently one of the actually main reasons as well. League is just a very fun game. It adds a lot of fun and dopamine and satisfaction as well.
Before I let Azzap respond to that, the comments will not like it if you don't respond to the you can collect a diamond if you just kind of farm as a control mage. I think we have to address that.
And I see your point. Yes, if you can farm 10 CS per minute and not die and take good trades and ward and lean and reset well and understand where your jungler is and be there at neutral objectives, yeah, you can probably get to diamond, but that's very hard to do. So inherently embedded within someone that is doing those skills already is actually very good at the game, and they have a very expanded mental stack. So to be able to farm that well, you would have to have good wage management, good matchup understanding, good trading. You'd have to know when to reset. You'd have to know where your jungler is. You'd have to have good threat assessment. You'd have to know when the next neutral objective is spawning and be there. You'd have to do all these things. That already inherently makes you a diamond player. So you can't just randomly do nothing. Doing nothing is like a kind of a term for actually being a very good.
It's a very lazy term, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the debate with LS.
With
that's
LS
a
as
big
well.
one about that. If anyone wants to look at that.
The misconception about, 10 CS a minute and stuff like that.
What that actually means.
Any thoughts on that, Azzap? Because I know I did interrupt you earlier. So
yeah, I got a lot of things. Yeah, initially I used random, which is, I use the colloquial in a way people use random as something that's kind of beyond their understanding. In a way, there's nothing true in the universe. There's no true randomness in the universe. It's just everything is sort of probabilistic in a way, where people derive their decisions for certain reasons. We just are not privy to those reasons. So at best we can get an estimation like, it's 70% chance it's going to do this. Why I said it's kind of chaotic, because let's say you have a player in SoloQ and then you all have this sort of like 80% obviously true play. That's like 80% chance that they're going to do it. But very often in SoloQ, people don't do it. They just simply like give in to their impulses. They don't do it. And with the voice comms, it would be a bit more structured. They wouldn't really do it. And the way a lot of people climb is essentially by just abusing the fact that a lot of people give in to these impulses. They're undisciplined. So when I say it's like do nothing, it's kind of like, it's obviously an exaggeration, but in a way, it's talking about two different forms of skill. There's like liquid skill of fully understanding the game and like playing it consciously, versus a crystallized skill of micro patterns of just playing your own champion in certain matchup, playing your like regular wave states and stuff like that. So I think that's more crystallized in a way where if you take this is like a recent debate with a bunch of people when you have Dante's playing not Hecarim and he's having a terrible time on AD carry, like horrible time having, because there's not too much of liquid skill. It's a lot of crystallized skill in a way where he's got these pre-designed patterns and he's doing this sort of stuff, but without really consciously processing a lot of the stuff that's happening on the map. And like, it's just really, we kind of differ, I guess. The main contention is like, what do we reward and what do we call a skill? I think skill, like liquid skill, would be something more true to like real skill that ought to be maximized, compared to like crystallized skill where you just repeat certain actions until you get really good at them. When you're confident at farming and like you just slowly like seep in this knowledge and like that's matchup specific, which obviously changes throughout year to year. You're not really learning how to do crazy decision making. You're just doing it because it works in this year against this matchup specifically.
Yeah, so I've got a model that probably describes what you're trying to explain more eloquently. And so basically what you're trying to describe, correct me if I'm wrong, and what I use in my coaching is this whole idea is that League is a game of logic and execution. Okay. So you can understand something logically. You can understand why is this dragon call objectively good or bad? And you can get into the specifics. It's good because we got two lanes of prio. We know where their jungler is. I've already reset. I'm on tempo, but we can get into all the underlying variables as to why that exact play is good. But there are players that would make that decision that intuitively feel that is the right decision, right? But they couldn't actually describe or understand or break down the underlying variables. They just have played so many games, have so much muscle memory that their intuition is telling them, you know what, I can do dragon here. And so now what you've got is that the best players in League of Legends understand things logically and they can break down all the underlying variables. And they have all the muscle memory and intuition such that they don't need to necessarily allocate any of their mental stack towards everything in the game. And they kind of already intuitively know what the best play is just through sheer pattern recognition and intuition. And so a great example of a player like that is a Gurren. A Gurren understands the game very well in terms of actual logic, and he's got incredible muscle memory and intuition, and through his good quality skirmishing and just mass repetitions.
Really good execution of fighting.
Now, if we actually go a little bit further there and then tie that back to voice comms impedes intuitive understanding. It's interrupting the intuitive understanding because you're not having to, because the way League works in its current form is because it's so chaotic, you're putting yourself through a wide variety of scenarios, a mass variety of scenarios, all are really complicated in their own right. And so because there is inherently less structure, you're kind of forced in a way through mass repetitions to kind of like understand a lot about the game intuitively. Now, if you wanted to be able to do that consistently, you need to use the post-game review or analyze, okay, maybe why are those plays going right or wrong. But if the plays that are inherently less chaotic and they're more structured, I don't need as much muscle memory. I don't need as much intuition. I don't need to develop that innate ability to pattern recognize anything because it's all just kind of laid out. I already kind of know where everything is going. It's like my jungler's told this, we're going to prep for dragon and we're going to either trade dragon or contest it front to back. Every clash game is inherently, in a way, you're not learning much. There's not much to learn. It's like, oh, yep, we're going to review this one team fight here, and oh, yep, yeah, I guess we should have traded it off. But like the way you really learn in League is where it's like there's all this shit going on. You've got many different win conditions. Everyone's kind of got their own ideas, and then that's where like the beauty of that's where you're forced to really you got to empathize with other people. You got to start putting yourself in other people's shoes to understand why they would make those plays, and you got to go above and beyond to kind of be able to respond to all the chaos
really quickly. That it's actually not even possible to know all those variables you're talking about in communication anyway, so it's quite useless. Like if you're talking about sort of skills, Azap, in terms of like, okay, voice comms is just a new skill or whatever to add, or like people can over index in that. If I put a sort of a pyramid, or if I just rank the different skills that actually are really important in League, communication, in my eyes, is one of the lowest. I'm not saying that it's useless. It's definitely a skill, and it's definitely can be important. It's the lowest skill in League of Legends. In Counter-Strike and stuff, I reckon maybe that skill goes a little bit higher, whatever it is. I literally think it's on the bottom, like really, really low in terms of it's almost a useless
relative
skill.
to everything else.
Relatively everything else, exactly right. Yes.
But I would even argue that
it's turning into broken by concept.
But by adding communication, you would actually, you're adding it as another variable. I think it is another variable. Wait, it is another variable, but it would actually remove other variables. So it's not that it is an added variable. You're adding that as a variable, but because that's a variable, you're actually removing many other skills that I would have had to develop. That it's replacing it. It's probably taking out 2 or 3 additional things that I would have to have learned otherwise, because it's just simply replacing it. Hence why it is different. There's a lot there.
I'm
There's a lot there.
scared. That's what I'm scared of that voice comms is suddenly the skill of League is voice comms or whatever it is, Azap. And then all the YouTube videos come out. How do you utilize voice comms? The skill cap comes out of the video. The best tips, utilize voice comms. And it's the bottom tier of skills in League of Legends.
All right.
A course on how to ping properly is more useful in my eyes than how to talk about the game in voice comms.
So we've established Nathan is scared. Very scared. Extremely scared. Petrified of voice comms. But no, I think something we need to do as we palm it off again is let's really try and think about the average player experience here. I think we're kind of verging into high elo talk a little bit, guys, when it comes to talking
Can I just respond to the
absolutely
earlier? The way Nathan says, it would be at the bottom of the hierarchy, which it kind of would. That's why it wouldn't really change that much. It wouldn't be like that big of a deal. It would not really remove certain variables. I think it would just more so contextualize them in a way. Like you said, you have to, or Curtis said, you have to play like a ton of games to develop that intuition. Like you have to play a ton of games. But that's why we do like reviews. That's why we review the games, because we want to contextualize something. We want to be able to conceptualize it in a more logical, cerebral manner, because that's how we actually put into perspective, understand what the situation was in the first place. Like in a way, if you have like a bunch of chaos and a lot of things happen, it's very difficult to pick apart the useful parts. Whereas if you have something that's more contextualized, more conscious, it's a bit easier to understand what happened and what went wrong. And we're not assuming that, like, I don't think League of Legends solo queue would instantly pivot in this sort of like, oh, we're 5 friends clash with like this social dynamic, with we're all friends. We don't want to troll each other. We all want to play like super safe. We're playing tactically. We're trying to imitate like LEC because we watched it and we're hyped to play like competitive League. And like they're all super slow and methodical. It would just slow down a bit. Like I don't think solo queue would rapidly shift that much. Again, it would be like slow addition of solo queue. More and more people adapting to it because it's. I think it would bubble up to the surface as a way because it's better to climb, and then more and more people would adapt to it, and communication would get better. People would learn more. I think that's kind of the way I see it. That's my perception on this.
Do either of you guys think it would change a lot?
Yeah, I think it would just be it would change. It wouldn't in the short term, but in the long run, what would happen is, again, people's skills would atrophy, and people wouldn't be as forced to learn as much. It's like, I now have access to my phone, and I don't have to go to the library and pick up a book and learn all these things manually. You know, I've got my phone. I can just press Google, ChatGPT something. Just like in League, like I don't need to learn all these things because my jungler, I don't need to.
Just to cut you off there, is that a bad thing that we have ChatGPT and don't have to go to the library?
Well, I don't really. It's probably not the greatest analogy or the metaphor, because
you're like talking about that movie WALL-E, where like everyone's all the fat people on the, like there's no humans don't need to work anymore, and everyone's just looking at the screens. Like Curtis, that's like your vision of like League. We're just like all a bunch
because
of
we're making it inherently easier. Because the game would be inherently easier in that regard. If people are giving me information, I wouldn't be incentivized to develop those skills myself. Why would I ever need to jungle track first clear anymore when the jungler's probably just going to be, you know, telling me where they are all the time? Or why would I need to track support roams when the enemy my support's going to be...
So Azzap has acknowledged that. It's more that he's saying that the extent that will change the game is very minimal.
Right.
But are you saying it will actually change it quite a lot?
Yeah, over the long run, yes. I think the level of play would get lower. The game would get more stale, and it would get lower. Yes, that's what would be my contention.
Okay. So, before we get on to like the Riot stuff, I guess this is kind of Riot perspective as well, but something I've just been thinking about is like, do you guys think that the average player wants voice comms? Is this something that is kind of just come from a very vocal minority, or is this representative of like the average player's thoughts? We're kind of having to hypothesize here, hazard a guess, but Azap, what do you think? Do you get the vibe that people want this?
I think the average person like doesn't want anything. Almost ever. Like they don't
really
know
nihilistic, man. That's really nice. Like
they
this
really
is a
don't
League
know
of
what
Legends
they
podcast,
want.
like a Nietzsche book. Come on.
It's always like a vocal minority advocating for it. I think, but they're doing it in a rational way because they're making a pretty compelling case for why there should be voice chat. And you can take a look at all the other games and why it's a staple for all the other games. So I don't think like the average player is concerned with this at all. Like they don't care. But I think the average player would benefit from the voice chat.
I just want to like circle back on the other games thing. Like I think that like, yeah, sure, we can use the closest example as Dota 2, right? Like, I really think Dota 2 is very different to League. And actually, as it is now. But in a way, it's interesting because I think League and Dota 2 are slowly converging in a way. Where, like, Dota 2 is a very, like, it was always a very elitist high-level game. Yeah. And League is actually... It's interesting because, like, over time, it's almost like League is naturally gravitating to that. Like,
are you saying because it's getting more solved, or
no? It is becoming a more hardcore player base because of how hard it is to casually like pick up League. Like, League's a very hard game to like just casually pick up. For like, if you told your friend, "Hey, come play, check out League of Legends," it's like, what the fuck is this?
Yeah, it's like the young. I guess like. I don't know the average age of. I feel like Dota players are a bit more older crowd, and then we're becoming that as League.
We're becoming that.
Everyone's playing, aging. Minecraft. Like the younger, it's very hard for the younger, or
so like
they're not playing League.
So like I feel like League slowly now can be actually compared to Dota 2. Maybe not at the same extent, but it slowly can be. And yeah, I guess like the because it is such an elitist, like highly competitive game, and it's not really a good casual game. Like, it is viewed in a positive light, like, voice comms, from what I've heard from people. So, it's interesting now, like, mentioning that, it's like, is that where we want League to be? Just thinking out loud, like, I think Dota 2 literally is the only game that we can compare it to. We can't say all games, just because Counter-Strike or Valorant or all these other games have voice comms. Like, I think we should think critically, like, Dota 2 is probably the only comparison to League of Legends.
But again, I think it's very hard, my perspective, because I think the barrier to entry to League is way lower still in the whole voice command thing because of like the characters, the universe, you got Arcane, and it's just a simpler game to pick up. But skill cap wise, obviously extremely hard. I think comparison with Dota is
still hard.
Still, yeah, I wouldn't even.
Do you have any thoughts on game complexity, Azzap?
Yeah, I think what Nathan said is correct. League of Legends is easier to pick up than Dota. Dota is this obscure game that's predominantly played by Russian 40-year-old dudes. And like the Eastern Europe baby child, they love this. Like, they love this. Like, I played Dota as a kid. And Dota 2, as I believe, is more difficult than League of Legends at the highest levels. And I think communication is one reason why, because it's a lot more difficult to find a crack in the enemy's armor. So you have to get more creative. You develop more different strategies. You become better at the game, understanding the game, because you need to break open somehow the enemies. They will not just make this like random mistake that comes out of sheer decoherence between 5 players, or like it's less likely to happen. And yeah, random is like being chaotical here, right? Just person doing something that they're not supposed to, and then you pick them off because it's a moment of like confusion or like just lack of discipline. So I think that's one of the reasons. And I think like League of Legends like one of the huge problems in League of Legends is like holding the audience. I think Arcane like brought a lot of people into League of Legends, but they failed to keep them. They really, really failed to keep them because the game is easier than Dota to go into in comparison, but it's still super, super difficult compared to most games. The lack of good tutorial, the lack of like entry, it's just very, very difficult for a person to start learning a game. And this is where my point originally, like from the Counter-Strike voice chat to the League of Legends voice chat. Like, if you had voice chat, it would be a bit easier to get into in a way. It would be easier to learn the game because it would be easier for you to understand what the goals and objectives of the game are, understand the tactics of it, understand that like majority of the time people spend conversing about the dragons and grubs, and like these blue buffs and red buffs and where they're pathing, and all these things would help people understand the game like more consciously compared to like just playing through the fog of like, I'm solo, I don't know what's going on in the map, but it's everybody else's fault.
We've kind of answered this a little bit already, but do you guys have anything to add to that regarding newer players joining the game?
I just think that would be, again, like, I just don't think it would help. I don't think it would really do anything. Like, it's again, the blind leading the blind. If someone's new to the game and they're all level 29 or 30 and some guy's like, oh, we should do Dragon. And then, like, no one knows what to do anyway. So whether they do Dragon or not do Dragon, it has no bearing on the game.
But
so,
as I was arguing, that the sheer mention of Dragon will help people understand what to think about, what to prioritize.
I think that the person calling that, because we know that the games aren't really won around dragons in bronze or iron,
it's
right? It's all just like who knows how to deal damage. So whether Jim Bob is louder than Greg, and he says we should do dragon, the other guy says no, it has no bearing. It means nothing. There is no learning anyway, because the learning is always just I need to know how to deal my damage, and I need to learn what the other champions do.
Setting up a dragon is like, again, like that lowest skill on the
yeah,
hierarchy.
it's like whether we go, go play on the seesaw, or we go play on the swings. We're just playing. It doesn't matter. We're just, like it does. There is no difference. Like the learning is not coming from that situation at all. You know what I mean? Like it's just a party. We're all running around. The learning is only just, I need to know how my character deals damage, and I need to get golden experience. Right, that's it.
So Curtis really cares about people dealing damage. That's been established.
Yes.
Well done.
Wait, can I talk about this new player experience thing?
Yes.
So, yeah, and voice comms with that. So, it's a very common story that people picked up playing League from playing with their friends and learning the game with their friends on voice comms. That's a very, very, very common story, I think, for a lot of people. And that's helped them get more into the game and sort of understand the game. So, in that regard, I think that actually helps the new player experience a lot, but I don't think that's for normal games. Picking up, that shouldn't be in the ranked experience. Again, my purest SoloQ competitive, awesome game ranked.
But those people are going to be talking on voice comms anyway, though. You know what I mean? Whether voice comms was embedded in the client or not, if someone is with friends, they're going to be on Discord anyway.
Regardless.
They're going to, you know what I mean? Like, there is no... Yeah. Like, I don't think it literally has any difference.
These are the people
because the people that are going to be wanting to be on voice comms in normal games are going to be on voice comms anyway.
What, in
normal games? And like say when we first started playing, right? Yeah. Like you're playing with two buddies in normal games or Twisted Treeline back in the day. You're going to be in voice comms anyway.
Yeah, and you don't need the right inbuilt system.
No,
you just use everyone
exactly
use
right.
Discord anyway.
It won't change anything.
Doesn't change anything. Yeah, for the new.
I think we're neglecting the social aspect of this. Where a majority, I believe, large majority of the new players coming in, they play solo. They download the game. They heard from somebody. They don't really organize with other people. Oh, let's play. It's not as easy to find a duo or trio, like a full stack,
like a group or a community. Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
It's gonna help people socialize in a way and find actual friends through League of Legends.
Yeah,
like,
I would agree.
We live in a time where socialization is very difficult to come by. We went through 2 years of COVID where people didn't really communicate with other people at all. Like the kids nowadays are really they're really denied a lot of these opportunities. It's the nation of alienation, I think it would really, really do a good job helping people socialize and understand. And the socialization is also one of the biggest ways to diffuse the toxicity and bad situation, because a lot of it stems from the lack of understanding of social dynamics, playground dynamics.
If Riot's going to add voice comms, do it in normal games. I'm happy with that.
Yeah, no, but I would agree. I would agree with Azzap there. Like, I think it would have a net positive in that regard. And like the humanness, it definitely does. And there's no doubt about that. It's just, what's the cost on the competitive? And it ties back to the competitiveness, your argument, Nathan. It's a trade-off. And that's really what this argument has really come down to. I mean, we kind of disagree in the improvement aspect, but like, I think we can agree that like, there is always going to be a push and pull. There is no perfect solution here.
Exactly.
You can't definitively say we should 100% do it and it's right in every regard. You can't definitively say no in every regard.
I think Nathan would say no, but I'm going to give you the nuclear bomb button. All right. We have to go back to the start of the debate and answer the question, right? I'm going to give you guys both time, all three of you actually, because I think you actually might have completely different opinions a little bit.
Well, to even Curtis.
Potentially.
All
I
right.
just want to give you all a couple of minutes to actually answer the question, just face value. If you were the sole board member of Riot Games and you had all the choices, should voice comms be added to SoloQ?
Wait, I think we need the last point though, the Riot POV.
Well, that's kind of related to this, which is like, is it worth the risk, right? Which part would you like to address first, Nathan?
All right, Azapp says we can weave it in. Okay.
I think you weave it in your final answer.
Yeah, you can weave it in your final
Yeah,
answer.
okay,
Nathan is completely almost like literally expelled from the debate, I think, at this point as well, for just interfering with me the whole time. But yeah, we got to start with, we're going to end with Azap actually. So we're going to start with you, Nathan, if you want to weave it into your answer. You have to give an answer.
Be added to SoloQ? Yeah, of course. Obviously, I'll give an answer. Okay, so obviously, no, it will heavily complicate the game, make the player base worse, ruin the integrity of the rank system in SoloQ. People over-indexing a skill, or the skill of voice comms will become important, and that will hurt everyone's progress in general. People can't focus on themselves. And yeah, now from a Riot's perspective, is it sort of worth the risk? you know, as Azap said, you know, 15 years, you know, the culture is of SoloQ, you know, like unless they feel like the game is dying, everyone in the community always says that the game's dying. There's no real data to support that. I maybe it would make sense as a last resort, but from Riot's perspective, I don't think it makes any sense to make such a big change to, you know, hurt their bottom line. As sort of Azap said, you know, companies, you know, profits, you know, it was all about the profits for the shareholders, right? That's a massive thing. Everything's sort of just going okay. I think it's if they were to do voice comms and then say, guys, bad idea, let's revert it, the PR nightmare of that would be insanity, right? I mean, then everyone's like, oh, you know, Riot loses, you know, if you guys don't know what you're doing as a game developer, all that sort of stuff, you know, I don't even think Riot's from their, you know, egos, they want to be the best developer, you know, it's like, if they make a decision that poorly, you know, does that affect, you know, again, the shareholders, you know, their stock price tanks or whatever it is. So, yeah, from Riot's perspective, I don't think it makes any logical sense to add voice comms anyway.
Okay, very succinct answer. Curtis?
All right, so I just had to have a quick toilet break. I was going to pee my pants, so I'm back.
Thanks for letting us know that.
Yeah,
why would you acknowledge that?
I got to let the audience know.
That's true.
Why
There was
there
a weird part.
There was a weird
That's
cut.
why you need
Everyone's-
voice chat, so you can tell that to people, you know?
Yeah,
Wow.
I'm going AFK to go to the bathroom. Okay, so yeah, no, this conversation has actually given me a few interesting things to think about. So I would say voice comms should not be added, but not for the reason that I thought they shouldn't be added. So I think that number one, from a Riot's perspective, it's way too much risk, and I actually value that very highly, and I think that there's so many short-term negatives that I think that, like, I just don't believe Riot would be strong enough to stand by their decision and weather the storm. And we've seen them go back on things in the past. I just think that would create a lot of complications there, which I don't personally feel comfortable with, that they're competent enough to handle that situation. Secondly, I don't believe it's going to actually help if the quality of the play. If anything, I think it would make the quality of the competitiveness worse. But it's really close for me to actually say this, because I think the humanness aspect and the human element and the social element I rate that so highly that I was borderline even willing to say yes. Like, I think as you mentioned before, like, we live in a society now where, like, the human aspect of just, like, socializing and, you know, like, humanizing our decisions and humanizing gaming in general, you know, something that we try to do here, I guess, put our face in the camera and, you know, our communities in our academies, and just, like, it's something that I've been really, like, I think we miss. I think League of Legends really misses, honestly. And I think back in the day, League of Legends had more of it, like with Twisted Treeline, and it was a more, like, welcoming environment, and the humanist element of, like, you know, we had LAN parties, like, what are they called, like, local tournaments they don't happen anymore. Like, I think there's an element of just, like, humanness that is missing in League. So honestly, I'm, like, really, really on the fence, but just because of the Riot aspect, I just don't believe they'll handle that situation well. I'm going to say no, but it's very close.
Azap.
Yeah, I think from a Riot's perspective, where they say that they want a better community, they want higher quality games, they really wanna create a better community in a way. And I think, like, adding the voice chat would increase, like, all aspects of it. It would become a much better spectator sport. It would produce way more highlights, especially on the top level. You'd have a lot of more interaction between streamers, players, top pros. That would produce a bunch of highlights. And the voice chat is kind of crazy. It's a little bit late in a way to add it. Like, you're so late. Like, this should have been done before. And if I was right, like, I would be thinking to add it way before, because you got to keep up with the times. You really need to start creating this community as early as possible and add more people onto the voice chat. It will help also produce better community in a way where I think their future profits would benefit from it. So I think if I'm Riot Games, I would probably be slightly leaning and advocating and, like, looking into more data on this and how we can implement the voice chat. And one side benefit of this would be, because there was one clip of Riot August mentioning how Riot Client is not designed for voice chat. The current system that works, like, peer to peer, like with the duo, is not designed for mass adoption. So they would have to rework the client in a way. So that would be a big bonus. Client's been horrible for years now. I think adding the voice chat there would really, really help out. And yeah, I think their bottom line would be better couple of years down the road. But I understand perfectly the risks of the PR nightmare, the most toxic game, adding the voice chat. There's a lot of like bad stuff implied there going on. So definitely, the monetary aspect of it, I think it would be like I think it would be leaning into adding the voice chat.
Okay, so Azzap wants to add it. You guys don't. Nathan much more than Curtis. Curtis almost on the fence.
No, yeah.
Awesome discussion. Nathan, close us out.
Yeah. Well, thanks for joining us, Azap. I think this was a really good conversation to be had. We were sort of talking before whilst Curtis was sort of off camera saying a lot of the time what you observe on Twitter, the voice comms, is just sort of like a statement sort of thrown out. Like, so it's cool that we have this platform to talk more in depth about these topics. And what we wanted this episode to be is just let's throw out these questions, these topics in the community. And, you know, I don't really care sort of what's right or wrong. You know, like let's just get people thinking more critically about the topic of voice comms rather than you know, potentially the vocal minority pushing this, all the challenger players pushing this, and then maybe little Iron Timmy saying, actually, maybe they'll come out and say, wait, this would be really bad. I feel like I'll be overwhelmed. This is just too bad for, you know, for my, yeah, so it's good to have this conversation, and, you know, hopefully a Riot maybe could see this and respond. That'd be awesome as well.
And hopefully we can have more of these, like more of these debates. If there's topics in the future that people watching this that you would like us to discuss, whether it's with Azap or other people, let us know. I think obviously it's a pleasure talking to you, Azap. You know, you're a very logical person, and this discussion was like really pleasant because you can tell none of us are super, like we're all just passionate about the game and
love League of Legends.
But there's a balance of emotion and logic, which I think is really just pleasurable. So yeah, thank you for coming on, and let us know in the comments if there's what you guys think in the comments. That'd be awesome to hear from the community, and then also if there's any topics that you would like to discuss in the future. Any
final words, Azap?
Yeah, this was awesome. Super happy to be here again. Like last time was a great discussion. This time we had a wonderful time, like trying to make like good arguments and trying to understand the positions. As we were talking during the break, Nathan and me, like I haven't heard voice chat arguments that are really good and that fleshed out to this degree, because usually people just say, oh, but people are toxic. You know, it's like the super redundant stuff like that. And yeah, as I said, I think it's just very important that we put it all out there. We mention these things, and then the community, like, I can't wait to see what they do with it, because they will run with it. They will make much better arguments than we ever can, and they will just compile, like, and they're going to give us their opinions. So I can't wait to read the comments. It's going to be awesome to see, like, how they can improve upon our positions and, like, how they would implement it or not implement it, and what are the benefits and downsides.
Awesome. All right, well, that wraps up our great debate on whether voice comms should be added to SoloQ. We'll see you guys in our next episode.